He bought the most beautiful Apache slave woman, and by the next day she had become his wife. The desert landscape stretched endlessly, its reddish-brown hills rolling gently beneath the wide, open sky. Samuel Hayes rode slowly along the narrow trail, his horse's hooves kicking up small clouds of dust. He had traveled for days, leaving behind the small town where he had grown up, following the winding paths of the Rio Grande. Samuel was a trader by profession, but he was also a man who loved stories, stories of people, of lands, and of lives different from his own. Today, he was on one of his usual trips to the frontier outpost, a small settlement where traders, travelers, and locals came to buy and sell goods. The outpost itself was modest. A few wooden buildings lined the main dirt road, each offering goods ranging from food and cloth to tools and animals. The air was filled with a mixture of smells: fresh bread from the small bakery, the earthy scent of livestock, and the faint hint of smoke from cooking fires. Children ran freely along the streets, laughing and playing, while women in simple dresses chatted quietly by the well. Men bartered loudly, trying to get the best prices for their goods, their voices echoing against the nearby hills. Samuel had been coming here for years, but he still felt a certain thrill every time he arrived. There was something about the mix of people, the vibrant energy, and the unexpected stories that made these visits exciting. As he walked through the market, Samuel noticed a small crowd gathered near one of the stalls. Curiosity got the better of him, and he made his way through the throng. There, in the middle of the crowd, stood a woman who immediately caught his attention. She was unlike anyone Samuel had ever seen. Her hair was long and dark, falling straight down her back, and her eyes were sharp, observing everything with a quiet intensity. She did not fidget or look nervous, even though people were whispering and pointing. There was a calm strength about her, a sense of dignity that made her stand out even in the bustling crowd. Samuel had heard stories before of people from distant lands being brought to the settlements as captives, but he had never actually seen someone in person. The woman's presence was striking, and he found himself drawn to her, not out of curiosity alone, but because there was something in her eyes that spoke of resilience and intelligence. People around him were speaking in hushed tones, commenting on her beauty and her quiet strength, but Samuel noticed more than just her appearance. There was a story behind her gaze, one that hinted at a life filled with challenges, but also a will that could not be easily broken. He approached the stall cautiously, not wanting to offend or draw too much attention to himself. The trader behind the table looked up as Samuel neared. "Ah, you've noticed her too," the man said with a knowing nod. "She's new to the market, a fine, strong woman, truly remarkable." Samuel nodded, though he didn't reply immediately. His eyes remained on her, trying to read something he could not yet understand. There was a quiet tension in the air, a mixture of expectation and hesitation. The woman met his gaze briefly, and for a moment it felt as if time had slowed. Samuel felt a strange connection, an unexplainable pull that made him want to learn more about her, to understand her story. After a few moments, Samuel spoke to the trader, asking questions about the woman. He learned that her name was Isla, though he suspected there were layers of her identity that went beyond the name he had been given. She had been brought from her homeland under circumstances he did not fully grasp, and she was now in the hands of people who saw her as property rather than as a person. Samuel felt a pang of discomfort at the thought, a subtle unease that made him think more deeply about what it meant to encounter someone in such a situation. He knew that many would only see her as an object of beauty or as a commodity, but he could not. He saw a human being, someone with thoughts, feelings, and a story that deserved to be heard. The crowd around them was restless, and Samuel could sense that the moment was fleeting. He made a decision, impulsive yet deliberate, that would change both of their lives. He offered to purchase her, not as a simple transaction, but as a way to ensure that she would be treated with respect and dignity. The trader agreed quickly, seeing the profit in the exchange, and soon Samuel found himself standing beside Isla, who looked at him with cautious curiosity. She did not speak at first, only observing him, her eyes thoughtful and discerning. Samuel realized that trust would not be immediate, and he respected that. He understood that their relationship would begin slowly, carefully, and with patience. As the day progressed, Samuel led Isla to a small, simple lodging he had arranged for his visit. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting warm light over the landscape, and the heat made the air shimmer. Isla walked beside him, her posture composed, her movements deliberate. Samuel noticed the way she carried herself, a blend of grace and quiet strength. He tried to engage her in conversation, speaking softly, asking questions about her journey, her homeland, and her experiences. She answered cautiously, revealing fragments of her story, enough to pique his interest and deepen his admiration. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, a feeling that something significant was beginning. Samuel felt an unusual mix of excitement and responsibility. He was aware that the choices he made in the coming hours could shape the course of both their lives. He wanted to act with kindness, to show respect, and to create a space where Isla could feel safe. At the same time, he knew that patience was essential. Trust could not be rushed. It had to grow naturally, nurtured through understanding and compassion. By evening, they reached the small lodging. It was modest, with wooden walls and simple furnishings, but it offered privacy and shelter from the busy outpost. Samuel showed Isla to her room, a quiet space where she could rest. He left her alone for a while, respecting her need for solitude after the long journey and the overwhelming experiences of the day. As he sat nearby, Samuel reflected on the unusual turn his life had taken. What had begun as a routine visit to the market had transformed into a profound encounter, one that carried the potential for connection, understanding, and shared experiences. As night fell, the desert sky filled with stars, each one twinkling like a distant promise. Samuel felt a sense of calm and hope, tempered by the awareness that their journey together was just beginning. Isla, in her room, watched the night sky through the small window, thinking about the stranger who had purchased her. She felt a mix of apprehension and curiosity, sensing that there was something different about him. Unlike others she had encountered, he seemed to see her as a person, not merely as a possession. For the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of possibility, that her future could be shaped not by fear or circumstance, but by choice, trust, and mutual respect. As the two settled in for the night, neither fully understood what the next day would bring. Yet in that quiet desert outpost, a subtle bond began to form, a bond based on observation, mutual respect, and the potential for understanding. Samuel had encountered many people in his travels, but none had left such a strong impression on him. And Isla, despite the uncertainty of her situation, sensed that her life might take an unexpected and transformative turn. That first day ended quietly, with the soft sound of wind moving through the wooden structures and the distant calls of nocturnal animals. Both Samuel and Isla lay awake for a while, each contemplating the events that had brought them together. There was no rush, no urgency, only the silent acknowledgement that something meaningful had begun. It was the start of a story neither could have anticipated, a story that would unfold with patience, understanding, and the quiet courage to trust one another. And so, in the fading light of the desert day, a new chapter began, not one defined by transactions or appearances, but by the slow, careful emergence of connection, respect, and the possibility of shared life. The morning sun rose slowly over the desert, casting a golden glow on the dusty town and the small lodging where Samuel and Isla spent the night. The air was crisp, carrying the soft scent of sagebrush and earth warmed by the early light. Samuel woke early, as he often did, and quietly moved about, careful not to disturb Isla. Though she had not yet spoken much, her presence in the room felt significant to him, a quiet reminder that life could surprise even the most experienced traveler. When Isla emerged from her room, she looked around the modest space with a careful curiosity. Everything was simple, yet clean and orderly, and it was clear that Samuel had made some effort to provide comfort. She paused for a moment, taking in the details: the neatly swept floor, the small table with a jug of water, the sunlight spilling across the wooden walls. Her eyes met Samuel's, and for the first time there was a small, almost imperceptible smile on her lips. It was not a smile of ease or total trust, but a gesture that suggested she was willing to observe, to learn, and perhaps to understand him. Samuel noticed the movement and responded with a gentle nod. He had no intention of rushing her. "Good morning," he said softly. "I hope you slept well." His voice was calm, inviting, without any hint of authority or demand. Isla nodded, her eyes cautious but attentive. "I slept," she replied simply. There was no flourish in her words, no attempt to impress, only a quiet honesty. Samuel appreciated that. He understood that trust would come slowly, and he was willing to wait, to let her take the time she needed to feel secure in his presence. They shared a simple breakfast together, a small meal of bread, fruit, and a little cheese. Samuel made no attempt to dominate the conversation, instead allowing Isla the freedom to speak if she wished. At first she remained quiet, eating slowly, her gaze moving from the food to the room and then back to Samuel. Yet, as the minutes passed, she began to ask small questions about the town, the travelers who came there, and the surrounding lands. Samuel answered patiently, giving details about the rivers, the hills, and the people who lived there. He told stories of his travels, of traders he had met, and of the lessons he had learned from people from different places. Isla listened intently, sometimes interrupting with thoughtful questions or comments. There was a subtle intelligence in her observations, a sharpness that caught Samuel by surprise. She noticed details that others might overlook: the way the sun reflected on a window, the patterns of birds in the sky, the expressions on the faces of townspeople passing by. Her attention to detail revealed a mind that was both curious and careful, someone who noticed more than what met the eye. Samuel admired this quality, recognizing in her a depth that could not be measured by beauty or appearances alone. As the morning unfolded, Samuel decided to take Isla on a walk through the settlement. The streets were beginning to fill with people, merchants calling out to attract customers, children laughing as they ran past, and women carrying baskets of food or tending to small chores. Samuel walked beside Isla, allowing her to set the pace. He noticed that some townspeople watched them curiously, whispering to one another. Samuel ignored the stares, focusing instead on making the experience as comfortable as possible for Isla. He offered her a reassuring smile when their eyes met, silently conveying that she was safe and that he would respect her boundaries. They passed the small market where Samuel had first seen her, and Isla's gaze lingered on the stall for a moment. She did not speak, but her eyes reflected a mix of emotions, perhaps curiosity, perhaps reflection, or perhaps the beginnings of understanding. Samuel said nothing, giving her the space to process her thoughts. After a few minutes, she finally spoke, asking about the trader and the people who had brought her there. Samuel answered carefully, choosing words that were honest yet gentle. He wanted her to know the truth without overwhelming her with unnecessary details. Their walk continued to a nearby creek, where the water sparkled in the morning sun. Samuel suggested they sit by the water for a while, and Isla agreed. She knelt by the creek, letting her fingers trail in the cool water, while Samuel sat a short distance away, watching her. There was a peacefulness in the moment, a quiet pause in the flow of life, allowing both of them to reflect. Samuel spoke softly about the landscape, the birds, and the plants along the water's edge. Isla listened carefully, occasionally asking questions about things she had never seen before. Their conversation was slow and deliberate, each word carrying thought and attention. As they spent more time together, Samuel began to see the layers of Isla's personality. She was cautious, yet she had a playful curiosity. She observed the world carefully, yet there were moments when her humor shone through, small smiles or quiet laughter at simple observations. Samuel felt a sense of admiration growing within him, not just for her beauty but for her intelligence, her dignity, and the way she carried herself. He realized that she had endured much in her life, yet she had maintained her sense of self, her strength, and her independence. By mid-morning, Samuel suggested they visit a nearby workshop where he often traded goods. It was a place filled with tools, cloth, and items from faraway places. Samuel showed Isla the various objects, explaining how they were made and what they were used for. Isla listened carefully, her curiosity evident in her attentive eyes and thoughtful questions. She asked about the origins of some of the items, about how people from different lands created them, and about the customs of traders. Samuel found himself impressed by her interest and understanding, realizing that her knowledge was deeper than he had first assumed. Throughout the day, Samuel made sure to treat Isla with respect and kindness. He did not rush her, did not demand explanations or expressions of gratitude. Instead, he allowed her to take her time, to observe, and to respond at her own pace. He recognized that her trust would not come easily, and he wanted to honor that. Their interactions were simple but meaningful, gestures of courtesy, moments of shared observation, and quiet conversations that built the foundation of understanding. By late afternoon, the sun had climbed high in the sky, casting long shadows across the town. Samuel and Isla returned to the lodging, both feeling the subtle exhaustion of a day spent walking, talking, and observing. Yet there was also a sense of accomplishment, a feeling that the day had brought them closer in ways that were both unexpected and significant. They had shared experiences, learned from each other, and begun to establish a connection built on respect and curiosity. That evening, Samuel prepared a modest meal, inviting Isla to sit with him as he ate. They spoke more freely than they had in the morning, exchanging thoughts about the town, the people they had seen, and the landscapes around them. Samuel learned about Isla's observations of the market, her thoughts on the natural beauty of the area, and her impressions of the traders and townspeople. In turn, Isla learned more about Samuel, his travels, his experiences, and his perspectives on the world. The conversation flowed naturally, neither forced nor hurried, and it deepened the sense of understanding between them. As the day came to an end, the two sat quietly by the small window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of pink, orange, and purple, and the gentle evening breeze carried the scent of desert flowers. Samuel and Isla did not speak for a long time, allowing the beauty of the moment to fill the space between them. There was a growing sense of connection, not based on words alone, but on shared experience, mutual respect, and the recognition of each other's presence and humanity. Before retiring for the night, Samuel spoke softly. "I know this day has been a lot, and tomorrow will bring more. But I want you to know that I respect you, and I hope you can trust me a little more each day." Isla nodded, a quiet acknowledgement of his words, and a small sense of comfort settled between them. They both knew that the days ahead would be filled with challenges, questions, and new experiences, but there was also a growing sense of hope and possibility. That night, as they lay in their separate rooms, both Samuel and Isla reflected on the day. Samuel felt a deep admiration for her courage, intelligence, and strength. Isla, for her part, sensed that Samuel was different from others she had known, someone who could be trusted, someone who might become more than a stranger in her life. The desert outside remained quiet, the stars twinkling overhead, a silent witness to the beginning of a relationship built on patience, respect, and the slow unfolding of trust. And so the second day passed quietly, marked by small steps of understanding, shared experiences, and the gentle beginnings of connection. It was a day that neither Samuel nor Isla would forget, a day that planted the seeds of what might grow into a partnership founded on mutual respect, curiosity, and the hope for a shared future. The morning sun rose gently over the desert horizon, spilling soft golden light. Across the small town, and the modest lodging where Samuel and Isla had begun their tentative friendship. The desert air was fresh and calm, carrying the subtle fragrance of wildflowers and sage. As Samuel prepared for the day, he reflected on the progress of the past 2 days. He could see that Isla was thoughtful, careful, and intelligent, qualities that had already begun to deepen his admiration for her. He knew that building trust would take time, but he was determined to continue patiently, one small step at a time. Isla stepped outside, her dark hair catching the morning sun, and her gaze swept across the streets of the town. She had grown accustomed to her surroundings, yet every day brought new sights, sounds, and questions. Today she wanted to explore more, to observe the town and its people in detail, and to understand the life she had entered. Samuel noticed her focus and offered a quiet smile, acknowledging her independence. He understood that respecting her space was as important as sharing knowledge or guidance. As they walked through the town, the streets were busier than usual. Traders were setting up their stalls, and the sounds of activity filled the air. Children ran about, laughing and chasing each other, while townspeople carried baskets and goods from one place to another. Samuel and Isla moved slowly, taking in the details of the bustling market. Samuel pointed out different merchants, explaining the items they sold, and sharing small anecdotes about their personalities. Isla listened carefully, occasionally asking questions or sharing her own observations. There was a subtle tension in the air, however. Some townspeople whispered as they passed by, casting curious glances at Isla. Samuel could sense the questions in their eyes. Who was she? Why was Samuel with her? Was there more to their connection than met the eye? Despite the whispers, Samuel remained composed, walking confidently beside Isla and offering gentle encouragement. He wanted her to feel secure, to know that their growing bond was valued and protected. By mid-morning, Samuel suggested they visit a quiet area outside the town, where the desert opened into rolling hills and soft grasses. The space was peaceful, far from the chatter of the market, and perfect for conversation and reflection. As they walked, Samuel began to share stories from his travels, tales of distant towns, people he had met, and lessons he had learned from life on the frontier. Isla listened intently, occasionally asking questions that revealed her curiosity and sharp mind. She was particularly interested in how Samuel had handled challenges and solved problems, showing that her attention went beyond surface details. After a while, Samuel noticed a subtle change in Isla's demeanor. She was beginning to speak more freely, offering her thoughts and insights rather than simply asking questions. She commented on the landscape, the shapes of the hills, and the patterns of clouds in the sky. She observed the behavior of birds and small animals, connecting their actions to the environment around them. Samuel was struck by her depth of perception. It was clear that she had learned to observe the world carefully, a skill likely honed by experience and necessity. They found a small, shaded spot beneath a lone tree where they could sit and rest. Samuel brought out some water and shared it with Isla, and they talked quietly about the beauty of the desert and the simplicity of life away from the town. The conversation was slow and thoughtful, with pauses that allowed both of them to reflect on their surroundings and on each other. Samuel realized that these moments of calm were crucial, helping Isla feel safe and gradually building a bridge of trust between them. As the day went on, Samuel suggested they visit a small workshop nearby, where local craftsmen created tools, pottery, and textiles. He wanted Isla to see the work of people in the town, to learn how they lived and earned a living. She was fascinated, asking questions about the techniques, the materials, and the effort required to create each item. Samuel explained patiently, and together they examined the objects with care. The shared experience was more than educational. It was a moment of bonding, a way for them to connect through observation, conversation, and mutual curiosity. By afternoon, word of Samuel and Isla's presence in town had spread further. Some townspeople watched from a distance, whispering among themselves. Samuel noticed the attention but remained composed, showing Isla through his calm demeanor that there was nothing to fear. He recognized that their relationship was unusual for the community's expectations, but he also understood that respect and patience were more important than the opinions of others. Isla, observing Samuel's confidence and consideration, began to feel a sense of security she had not experienced since arriving in the settlement. During their walk back toward the lodging, Samuel encouraged Isla to share more of her thoughts and feelings. At first, she hesitated, unsure how much to reveal, but gradually she began to speak about her experiences, the landscapes of her homeland, and the lessons she had learned from observing people and nature. She described her love for the wide open spaces, the way the wind moved through the trees, and the subtle changes in seasons. Samuel listened intently, fascinated not only by her words but by the perspective she brought, a view shaped by her life experiences and her thoughtful observations. As the evening approached, they returned to the lodging, their steps slow and deliberate. Samuel prepared a modest dinner, and they ate together quietly, enjoying the comfort of routine and the developing familiarity between them. Conversation flowed more naturally now, with laughter and smiles interspersed with moments of thoughtful silence. Samuel realized that the day had strengthened their connection, creating a foundation of trust and mutual understanding that could support deeper interactions in the days to come. After dinner, Samuel suggested they sit outside for a while, under the sky filled with stars. The night was clear and calm, the air cool and refreshing. They spoke quietly, reflecting on the day, sharing small insights about the town, the people they had seen, and their observations of life in the desert. Isla felt a growing sense of comfort with Samuel, recognizing that he valued her thoughts, respected her independence, and allowed her the freedom to observe and reflect. Samuel, for his part, was increasingly impressed by her intelligence, insight, and the calm strength she carried with her. As they sat together, a gentle wind moved across the desert, rustling the leaves of the lone tree nearby. Samuel turned to Isla and said softly, "I know that this world can be confusing and sometimes unfair, but I want you to know that I respect you, and I hope you can trust me a little more each day." Isla looked at him thoughtfully, considering his words. She felt a quiet sense of hope, realizing that, despite the uncertainty she had faced, there was someone who saw her as more than just a visitor, more than just an observer, someone who recognized her humanity, her thoughts, and her abilities. The night deepened, and the stars seemed to shine brighter above them. Samuel and Isla retired to their separate rooms, each reflecting on the day's experiences. Samuel considered how much he had learned from her perspective, realizing that intelligence, resilience, and careful observation were qualities he had come to admire deeply. Isla thought about Samuel's patience, his respect, and the way he had allowed her space while encouraging conversation and connection. She felt a subtle shift in her feelings, a recognition that perhaps this man was someone who could become more than a guide or a companion, someone who might truly understand her. As sleep approached, both Samuel and Isla carried a sense of calm anticipation. The day had been filled with small victories, moments of understanding, shared experiences, and the beginnings of mutual trust. Neither rushed the process, understanding that relationships of value take time to develop. They each knew that tomorrow would bring new experiences, new opportunities to learn about each other, and new chances to build the bond that had quietly begun to grow. And so, part 3 of their story ended quietly, with the desert night providing a peaceful backdrop to a relationship developing slowly but meaningfully. Samuel and Isla had taken significant steps toward understanding, respect, and trust. The whispers of the town continued, but they no longer mattered as much. What mattered most was the growing connection between two people, each learning from the other, each discovering the potential for shared life and companionship in a world filled with challenges and uncertainty. The morning air was crisp and quiet, carrying the faint scent of sage and desert flower as the sun slowly rose over the horizon. Samuel woke early, as he often did, to the soft light spilling through the window of the small lodging. He moved about quietly, careful not to disturb Isla, who still slept peacefully. Though the days had passed calmly, Samuel could feel that something important was beginning to develop between them, a connection built on observation, patience, and shared experiences. Today, he felt, might be another step forward in understanding her world and her thoughts. Isla awoke to the soft sounds of birds singing nearby. The desert morning had a gentle stillness, and she took a moment to enjoy it. She had begun to feel a sense of calm in this place, something she had not felt in a long time. Though uncertainty still lingered, she recognized that Samuel had shown her kindness and patience in ways few had before. She dressed carefully and stepped outside, feeling the warm sun on her face, and found Samuel already waiting, offering her a quiet smile. That small gesture, repeated each morning, had become a reassuring constant in her new life. They decided to spend the morning exploring the nearby hills, a place Samuel often visited when he wanted peace and space to think. The hills were gentle, dotted with small clusters of wildflowers, and offered a view of the surrounding town and the winding river beyond. As they walked, Samuel spoke softly, pointing out details of the landscape, the way the sunlight reflected on the rocks, the patterns of shadows on the hills, and the shapes of the clouds overhead. Isla listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions about the land and the people who lived nearby. She was beginning to share more of her observations, and Samuel appreciated the insight she brought, noticing things he himself had often overlooked. At one point, they came across a small stream, its clear water trickling over smooth stones. Samuel suggested they sit for a while and rest. He handed Isla a small cup of water and sat beside her, enjoying the peacefulness of the moment. For a long time, they simply observed the stream, watching as the water moved gently, carrying reflections of the sun and sky. It was in moments like these, quiet and unhurried, that the bond between them deepened. There was no need for many words. The shared presence and attention to the world around them were enough to create understanding. As the day progressed, Samuel suggested a small activity that had become a tradition during his travels, sketching the landscape. He had brought a notebook and pencil and encouraged Isla to try. At first, she hesitated, unsure of her ability, but Samuel's gentle encouragement gave her confidence. She began to draw the hills, the stream, and the shapes of the distant town. Her lines were careful, precise, and thoughtful. Samuel watched with admiration, not just for her skill, but for her willingness to try something new and unfamiliar. The activity sparked quiet laughter and conversation, moments of lightness amidst the seriousness of the desert life. Later, they walked toward a grove of small trees, shaded from the midday sun. Samuel spoke about the importance of observing life carefully, not rushing, but taking the time to notice details others might miss. Isla nodded thoughtfully, explaining how she had learned similar lessons in her own life, observing the world around her to stay aware and prepared. Samuel realized that Despite the challenges she had faced, she had developed wisdom and patience that were rare and valuable. Their conversation deepened, not through dramatic events or declarations, but through the steady exchange of thoughts and reflections. By afternoon, Samuel suggested they return to the town, as he needed to visit a nearby workshop to check on goods he had traded. Isla agreed, walking beside him with a quiet confidence that had begun to grow over the past days. As they entered the town, a few townspeople stopped to look, whispering among themselves. Samuel did not respond to the whispers, and neither did Isla. The subtle attention of others mattered less now. What mattered more was the trust and understanding between them, a bond built slowly, step by step, and strengthened by shared experiences and respect. At the workshop, Samuel introduced Isla to the craftsmen, explaining their work and the items they created. Isla watched with keen interest, asking questions about techniques, materials, and the creativity involved in their craft. She was fascinated by the process, and Samuel enjoyed seeing her curiosity come alive. He could see the spark of interest and engagement in her eyes, and it made him even more aware of her intelligence, thoughtfulness, and ability to adapt to new situations. The craftsmen, too, seemed to notice her interest, offering explanations and encouragement. After spending some time at the workshop, Samuel suggested a walk along the outskirts of the town, where the fields and hills met the open desert. The light of the late afternoon sun created long shadows and a warm glow across the landscape. They walked slowly, speaking about their observations, the people they had seen, and the simple joys of the natural world around them. The conversation was easy, natural, and respectful, with moments of laughter and moments of quiet reflection. Samuel felt a growing admiration for Isla, not just for her beauty or her resilience, but for her intelligence, her awareness, and her thoughtful perspective on life. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting a golden hue across the desert, Samuel noticed a subtle change in Isla's demeanor. She had become more open, more relaxed in his presence, and more willing to share her thoughts and feelings. He recognized this as a sign of growing trust, a slow but meaningful shift that reflected the care and patience he had shown, and the courage and willingness she had displayed in opening herself to another person. The realization filled him with quiet satisfaction, a sense that their relationship was moving forward in a positive and natural way. They returned to the lodging as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink, orange, and purple. Samuel prepared a modest evening meal, and they ate together, sharing stories and reflections from the day. The conversation was more fluid now, with laughter and gentle teasing interspersed with moments of thoughtful discussion. Samuel noticed that Isla was beginning to see him not just as a companion or guide, but as someone who respected her, valued her observations, and appreciated her presence. Likewise, Samuel felt a deepening sense of admiration for her strength, insight, and careful curiosity. As night fell, the two sat outside, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear desert sky. The evening was peaceful, the air cool and refreshing, and the silence of the desert was filled only by the sounds of distant wildlife. Samuel spoke softly about the importance of patience, respect, and understanding in relationships. Isla listened attentively, nodding thoughtfully. She felt a growing sense of connection, recognizing that this man was different from others she had encountered, someone who valued her mind as much as her presence, someone who offered understanding without expectation. As they prepared for bed, Samuel turned to Isla and said, "I know these days have been full of changes and new experiences, but I hope you can see that I respect you and that I will always do my best to treat you fairly." Isla paused, considering his words carefully. She felt a sense of comfort, realizing that Samuel's actions and words were consistent, reflecting genuine care and respect. For the first time in a long while, she felt that she could truly trust someone, even in a world that had often been uncertain and unpredictable. That night, both Samuel and Isla reflected on the day's experiences in quiet solitude. Samuel thought about how much he had learned from her perspective, how her observations and insights had opened his eyes to aspects of life he had not noticed before. Isla considered the patience and kindness Samuel had shown, the way he had allowed her space, while gently encouraging conversation and understanding. They both realized that their connection was growing steadily, not through dramatic gestures or sudden revelations, but through consistent, thoughtful, and respectful interactions. As the desert night deepened, with stars shining brightly overhead, Samuel and Isla drifted into sleep, each carrying a sense of quiet hope for the days to come. The fourth day of their shared story had passed, marked by gentle progress, meaningful conversations, and the subtle beginnings of trust and understanding. Neither knew exactly what the future held, but both felt that their lives were changing in ways that were unexpected, significant, and full of potential. And so, Part 4 ended with the desert night as a silent witness to the slow, deliberate growth of a bond that was neither rushed nor forced, but built on respect, curiosity, and shared experience. Samuel and Isla had taken another meaningful step toward understanding each other, deepening their connection, and preparing for the next chapter of their journey together. The morning sun rose softly over the desert, casting its warm light across the small town and the surrounding hills. Samuel woke early, as usual, but today there was a sense of excitement in the air, a feeling that this day might be different from the ones before. He moved quietly through the small lodging, careful not to wake Isla too abruptly. She had begun to sleep more peacefully, a sign that the trust they had been building over the past days was taking root. Samuel paused by the window, looking out at the vast, open landscape, and felt a deep sense of appreciation for the journey that had brought them together. Isla awoke shortly after, the soft light illuminating her face. She stretched gently, enjoying the warmth of the sun, and felt a sense of calm she had not known in a long time. The days with Samuel had been slow and deliberate, filled with small moments of observation, conversation, and understanding. She realized that she was no longer as hesitant or wary as she had been on the first day. A sense of ease and curiosity had begun to replace her initial caution, and she felt a growing confidence in her ability to navigate this new life. They shared a quiet breakfast, simple and wholesome, and then prepared for a walk through the outskirts of the town. Samuel suggested visiting a nearby grove where the air was cool, and the shade of trees provided a peaceful escape from the sun. As they walked, they talked about the events of the past days, their observations, the small lessons they had learned, and the ways they had begun to understand each other. Samuel noticed that Isla's confidence was growing, and he felt a quiet pride in her adaptability and thoughtfulness. By mid-morning, they reached the grove, a serene place where the light filtered gently through the leaves. Samuel found a comfortable spot beneath a tree, and Isla sat nearby. The air was filled with the soft sounds of birds and rustling leaves, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Samuel spoke softly. "I want you to know that I respect you and your thoughts. I hope you feel that we can share these days openly, learning from each other." Isla looked at him thoughtfully, sensing the sincerity in his words. She felt a warmth in her chest, a recognition that this was not a fleeting connection but a relationship built carefully, with respect and consideration. As they sat together, Samuel began to share stories of his family, his childhood, and the dreams he had for the future. He spoke of the simple life he wished to build, filled with honesty, hard work, and shared experiences. Isla listened, her eyes reflecting interest and thoughtfulness. She asked questions, not out of curiosity alone, but to understand his values, his beliefs, and the kind of life he envisioned. In return, she began to share more about her own past, her hopes, and the skills and knowledge she had acquired from her homeland. The conversation flowed naturally, bridging the gap between two very different lives. By afternoon, they decided to return to the town, stopping along the way to observe the small fields and gardens tended by local families. Samuel encouraged Isla to explore and interact, allowing her to see the lives of the townspeople without pressure or expectation. She began to speak more freely, commenting on the methods of planting, the care of animals, and the organization of households. Samuel listened with admiration, recognizing her keen intelligence, attention to detail, and thoughtful approach to life. It was clear that the bond between them had grown into one of mutual respect and admiration, built through shared experiences rather than force or obligation. Back in the town, Samuel suggested they visit the local craftsman again. This time, Isla was more confident, asking insightful questions about the trade, offering ideas and expressing her curiosity openly. The craftsman noticed her engagement and began to respond with encouragement, appreciating her thoughtfulness and attention to detail. Samuel watched, feeling a quiet joy. He realized that this day was different. The hesitations, fears, and uncertainties of the past days were slowly giving way to genuine connection and mutual understanding. As the sun began to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the town, Samuel led Isla to a quiet spot near the river. The water sparkled in the fading sunlight, reflecting the warm hues of the desert sky. Samuel turned to Isla, his voice gentle yet deliberate. "I know our journey began in an unusual way, but these past days have shown me something very important. I respect you, your mind, and your spirit. I hope you can feel that our bond is built on trust and understanding, not just circumstance." Isla paused, considering his words carefully. She felt a deep sense of affirmation, recognizing the sincerity in his voice and the consistency of his actions. They sat together in silence for a while, watching the gentle movement of the river and listening to the soft sounds of the desert evening. Samuel felt a growing certainty that the trust and respect they had nurtured were ready to transform into something more meaningful. He gently took Isla's hand, offering a small gesture of connection. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting both thoughtfulness and a subtle sense of acceptance. In that quiet moment, the unspoken understanding between them became clear. They had moved from cautious acquaintance to a bond of mutual trust, respect, and emerging companionship. As the evening deepened, Samuel spoke again, suggesting a small ceremony, not grand or elaborate, but meaningful in its simplicity. He wanted to honor the bond they had built, to mark the beginning of a shared life with recognition and care. Isla listened, her heart stirring with quiet anticipation. She had grown to trust Samuel, not because of force or obligation, but because of the patience, respect, and understanding he had consistently shown. The thought of formalizing their bond through marriage was not daunting. Instead, it felt like a natural step, a celebration of the connection that had grown organically over the past days. They arranged a simple ceremony with a few close townspeople as witnesses, ensuring that it was respectful and meaningful. Samuel and Isla stood together beneath the shade of a tree by the river, the sunlight casting a warm glow over them. There were no grand declarations or dramatic gestures, just a quiet acknowledgement of the respect, trust, and growing affection between them. As they exchanged words of commitment, a sense of calm and happiness settled over both of them. It was a moment of quiet joy, marking the beginning of a life built on understanding and mutual care. After the ceremony, Samuel and Isla walked slowly through the town, hand in hand. The townspeople who had watched their union expressed curiosity and some surprise, but also a sense of admiration for the respect and sincerity that was evident in their relationship. Samuel and Isla did not seek approval. Their bond was built on their own shared experiences and understanding. The quiet joy of this realization filled them both with a sense of freedom and hope, a feeling that they could face the future together, guided by mutual respect and care. That evening, as the sun set and the desert sky turned shades of pink and purple, Samuel and Isla returned to their lodging. They sat outside, sharing a quiet meal and reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. The days of cautious observation, thoughtful conversation, and gentle encouragement had culminated in a bond that was genuine, resilient, and full of potential. They spoke softly about their hopes for the future, working together, learning from each other, and building a life that honored both of their experiences and strengths. As night fell, the stars began to shine brightly overhead, filling the desert sky with their quiet light. Samuel and Isla sat in companionable silence, each reflecting on the past days and the journey that had led them to this moment. There was a sense of peace, a recognition that the bond they had formed was based not on circumstance or appearance, but on shared understanding, patience, and respect. The future was uncertain, as it always is, but they felt ready to face it together, confident in the strength of their connection. Before retiring for the night, Samuel spoke softly to Isla. "These days have shown me that respect, patience, and understanding can create something truly meaningful. I hope you feel the same way." Isla looked at him, a quiet smile forming on her lips. She nodded, recognizing that their journey together had not been rushed or forced, but had grown naturally, step by step, through shared experiences, trust, and care. It was a moment of mutual acknowledgement, a quiet celebration of the bond they had nurtured. That night both Samuel and Isla slept peacefully, the desert outside remaining calm and silent. The journey that had begun with uncertainty and observation had transformed into a relationship built on respect, trust, and the quiet joy of companionship. The stars continued to shine above, silent witnesses to the growth of a connection that was steady, meaningful, and full of potential. And so, the story concluded with Samuel and Isla beginning a new chapter of life together, a life shaped by understanding, patience, and the careful cultivation of trust. What had started as a simple encounter had grown into something enduring and beautiful, a testament to the power of respect, curiosity, and human connection. Their bond was not born of grand gestures, but of consistent care, attention, and the willingness to see and value each other fully. In the quiet desert night, they found not only each other, but also the promise of a shared and meaningful future.